Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today we are back in Final Fantasy XIV, talking a little bit more about Samurai, because of course this week has been my second week playing Samurai in Savage, just for fun of course. The gameplay in the background is of this week, but of course I'm still learning quite a lot. I am not a good Samurai player, so if you're trying to learn something from the gameplay in the background, there's definitely going to be much better videos out there. I'm just a casual Samurai player, I enjoy the job. I kind of know what I'm supposed to be doing, but that doesn't mean that I'm executing on it because I'm still adjusting to the fights, I'm still learning it again as a melee DPS, and then of course I'm also streaming when I am recording my Final Fantasy XIV gameplay most of the time, so I'm also paying attention to Twitch chat, and that means that my head is in all kinds of different places, trying to not die to the mechanics, trying to execute my rotation and trying to keep up with the Twitch chat. That my execution on my rotation might not always be that amazing, and I make a lot of mistakes, but I'm just human. I'm still learning how to play Samurai better, and hopefully in a couple of weeks I can play it to a better extent as well. But today is not going to be talking about how good Samurai is, how it fits in the meta and all of that stuff. Just going to be talking about how fun it is to play and kind of my opinions on how Samurai has become the job that it is right now in Shadowbringers, because it definitely didn't start out that way. Back at the beginning of Shadowbringers, Samurai was much worse in my opinion than what it is right now, and back in Stormblood it already was kind of decent, so let's start there. Now, back when Samurai first came out, I wasn't really super interested in trying it out because I had two friends of mine that were really into it, one of them being one of my raid members, and Red Mage came out together with Samurai, which I was so much more excited about than Samurai itself. So I played Red Mage at the start, and thus Samurai was kind of far back on the list of things to level back in Stormblood. Now, eventually I did level it. I thought once you hit level 62, that's kind of where it starts to be getting a whole lot more fun, because you get that Kenki trait that you generate Kenki on each GCD. And then of course you also get Shinten, something a little bit more active in your rotation to be using as well. Now, going all the way to 70, it did feel kind of alright. I thought that the dot management was something that was really interesting because it's quite different from the other jobs. On one hand, it is a very long dot, it's a 1 minute damage over time ability. Then it is also tied to your resource, and that resource is tied to your GCDs or to your combos as well. So I thought managing your dot was actually the most interesting thing about Samurai, but outside of that it did feel a little bit like a Shinten bot, meaning that you were just spamming Shinten quite a lot. And that's something that I didn't really like about it all that much. I do have to say that overall Samurai was pretty fun to play back in Stormblood. But I wasn't super into it because it just felt too much like a Shinten spamming class rather than anything else. Now, moving into Shadowbringers, they did change a couple of things. First of all, they got rid of Hagakure. They replaced it with Ike Shoten, which I actually didn't know about when I first started leveling my Samurai. I think I was like level 72 or something before someone pointed it out, that it was replaced by something else. But it basically made it so that Samurai felt more like a GCD focused job, more focused around using those EI jutsus, which was something that I really enjoyed. I thought like building up to get your Sen gauge full and then using those Midares, or that damage over time ability, or of course the cleave if you're in a dungeon or something like that. Was a whole lot more fun. Now, of course, eventually a friend of mine did pointed it out to me that Ike Shoten was a thing and that I should be using that, and then of course I put that on my hotbar, started using it, and then you kind of get that influx of Kenki gauge again, because it does give you 50 Kenki gauge, and basically you're spamming a little bit more Shintens again. But of course you do still keep all of your Sens, because you don't have Hagakure to basically get rid of them. So that was kind of like a upside to me. It felt pretty good to be able to use your Sens a whole lot more on your EI jutsus, and then you still had that very active off-global cooldown playstyle by spamming those Shintens still, because of the fact that you had Ike Shoten. Now, going over some of the other abilities that we got, there were a couple of cool ones in there, but they felt a little bit clunky. First of all, we have, of course, Sene. That one is great. It's basically the single target Guren. Thought it was a really good addition to the job. Then we have the Kaeshi, oh well, not Kaeshi, it's called Tsubame Gaishi, I believe, which basically allows you to execute your EI Jutsu twice, with a higher potency as well, which usually is going to be used on the Midare Setsugeka, so you would usually use it on that. But it felt a little bit clunky because you needed to use it immediately after you using your EI Jutsu, so you can't just use Midare, 2 GCDs, and then use your Tsubame Gaishi. You needed to do Midare, Tsubame Gaishi immediately, and since it was tied on its own separate cooldown, it could sometimes feel a little bit clunky to get it right over there, so I used to end up delaying my Mako for that. I'm still looking to see whether or not I should change anything over there. Again, as I said, I'm no Samurai Pro. It is something that felt a little bit clunky because sometimes you would be delaying your Meiko for it. Other times you would just be delaying your Tsubame Gaishi itself and let it drift for a couple of GCDs. So it felt a little bit weird. Now, the major complaint that I had with Samurai at level 80 was their level 80 skill, the Shoha I believe it is called. And that is because of how it functioned back then. So right now it actually works really well, and it's one of the things that I really like about the Samurai rotation, but back then it was actually really bad. So the way it worked was, you needed to have 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 meditation stacks. The more stacks you had, the more damage your Shoha would do, but the only way for you to gain meditation stacks was to actually use this off global cooldown meditate. And there were only 2 ways how you could really get meditation stacks. First of all, it would be during downtime when you're just running around. So you could just build up, well, not running around, you're standing still, but when the boss is phasing away or there's like going into an ad phase, something like that, and you have some time to meditate, that was one of the ways that you could do it. But if you have a fight that has almost near full uptime, you don't really have the chance to meditate all that much, and that meant that you would be using meditate as an off-global cooldown during your rotation without interrupting it, and that you would be fishing for procs, and that was something that was really bad about it, because your meditate is on the server tick, and server ticks are 3 seconds. Of course, 3 seconds is definitely not the GCD of a Samurai, it's usually more towards 2 seconds because you have an attack speed buff as well, and because of that you would often not get any procs when you used meditate as a normal off-global cooldown, and it felt really bad because it meant that if you had a fight that almost had full uptime, you wouldn't really get to use your level 80 skill at all in some cases. Now, of course, going into 5.1, they did make a change to this. They made it so that meditate is now a GCD instead of an off-global cooldown. And they also made it so that your EI Jutsus and your Tsubame Gaishi now generate a stack of meditate. And once you've got 3 meditate stacks, then you can use your Shoha. This was already pretty good change in 5.1. Going into 5.2, they also made the change that there is now a separate like HUD UI element for it as well, to basically make it a lot easier to keep track of, because that was one of the things in 5.1 that I was still struggling with a little bit. Your meditate stacks were something that was on your buff bar, and sometimes if you're playing in buff heavy compositions, your buff bar could be very bloated, like you have Battle Litany, Battle Voice, Embolden, maybe there's like a card of an Astrologian on there. You have of course your 2 personal buffs, like your damage buff and your attack speed buff, so sometimes it was kind of hard to keep track of where exactly your meditate stacks were and whether or not how many you had. Going into 5.2, there is now a separate UI element for that, where you basically keep track of how many stacks you have exactly, and it's a lot easier to keep track of. So I thought it was really good going into that. Now when it comes down to difficulty of playing Samurai, I think a lot of people think that Samurai is a very easy and simple job, and I would agree with that to some extent. Getting into Samurai as like a base general level of play, so to speak, is definitely an easy melee to get into, especially if you compare it to something like a ninja or a monk. Those require a whole lot more practice to be okay at. Whereas with Samurai, it's very easy to pick up and play. Now when it comes down to optimizing it and actually playing it very well, there are a lot of little intricacies when it comes down to getting your rotation to loop, because you are going to be using Hagakure, which was later reintroduced into the game, or into the Samurai kit again, by the way, but I'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, you basically have your Hagakure, which you're going to be using on different combo actions, to basically make your rotation loop. Then of course making sure you can use that Tsubame Gaishi on cooldown. Your Dotri application needs to be on time as well, and for your Meiko Shisui you don't want to be using Yukikaze during that either, because that's a DPS loss. So there's actually a lot of little tricks that you need to know of to be able to optimize your Samurai DPS, and it actually makes a pretty big difference going from someone that is like learning it from someone that has mastered it, because there's quite a big difference in things that you need to know on how to do, which is really fun to me because it makes it so that the job is very accessible to newer players, but it also means that there is a lot of things that you can do to optimize for more experienced players that really want to get everything out of the job that is in there. Now very quickly going back to the reintroduction of Hagakure, and the reason why I think it was kind of necessary. So they took it out of the game at the start of Shadowbringers because they reintroduced, well, they changed it with Iki Shoten to just be like a Kenki generation thing rather than having to delete your sense for it to generate that Kenki. But they had to reintroduce it for 2 reasons. First of all, dungeons. When you're running a dungeon and you had some sense left over when you start a boss fight, but your damage buffs were running out, then it could feel very bad because either you're going to be using your Midare Setsugeka, for example, without having your damage or attack speed buff, And on the other hand, if you wanted to refresh your buffs first before using it, then you would be overwriting your sense, and neither of these things felt really good. So they basically took Hagakure for that, or well, they put Hagakure back into the game to kind of remedy that, so that you could just get rid of the sense at the start of that fight or of that mini boss, and then you can just reapply your stuff as normal. On the other hand, Hagakure has also become a very important way for you to be able to loop your rotation, as I mentioned before. And that is because depending on how fast you go, depending on your skill speed, you are going to be using your Hagakure on different combo actions. So either if you only need 2 GCDs to be gone for your rotation, if you have a low skill speed, then you can just do a Yukikaze combo and then get rid of that one sen. If you have 3 GCDs that you need to do, you could do, for example, a Gecko combo, get rid of that sen. And if you have 4 GCDs, then you could do 2 Yukikaze combos and get rid of both of those sens every single time. So I think it's a really cool way for you to be able to loop your Samurai rotation. So all in all, TLDR, what I think about Samurai, well, I think it's a pretty fun job. It feels pretty smooth to play. As I said, it is really easy to get into as a newer player. So it's really fun to just pick up, and everything just kind of flows on its own, as it's pretty simple to pick up. But then on the other hand, if you do invest a whole lot more time into the job, there are a lot of little intricacies that you have to know about that allow you to push out so much more DPS from someone that only has a base understanding of the job. And it allows you to basically show the mastery of your job as well, that you are able to push out so much more. Because of course that is what Samurai is all about, doing the big DPS, and thus making it so that even though the job can feel very simple to pick up, it is something that takes a lot of time to master as well, and that is something that is definitely a lot of fun to me, and it's something that I'm going to be working on hopefully in the next few weeks as I continue to play it during my weekly Savage clears. Of course, I definitely don't expect to be a master of Samurai in a couple of weeks time, because it is just playing it once a week for Savage, and then just like flying through the fights as well, because we of course, if there's a bunch of wipes happening, or like if there's a bunch of people dying, we just heal LB and try to get a group through it anyways, so there's not really that much time to learn. But I'm still going to be trying it here or there, maybe practice on a dummy a little bit, because I'm getting back into Samurai quite a bit as well, and I am definitely enjoying my time on the job. But that's gonna be it for this video. I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my patrons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.